Hi, welcome to Good Morgan. I'm so excited. I'm so excited for this episode. It was phenomenal. What a conversation. Because it's all about shame and how shame is just destroying our love lives. It's destroying our relationships in general. And what do you do about it? What do you do about it? It's incredible. What an epic conversation. My guest today is Dana Doswell. She's at Dana Dozy on Instagram. And she focuses on nervous system regulation. If you were like, I want to listen to this because it's about shame, freaking listen to it, my friend, or watch it. Okay. Thank you for being here. Good Morgan. Let's rock. I'm so happy to meet you.
Likewise, I loved your message when you reached out to me. I was like, this is like such a good energy.
I love your videos. I love how you explain the concepts. And working with couples, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it in real time, not just in my own life and in my relationship, but in theirs. And you do such a good job of explaining what I'm seeing in my sessions. And I'm like, oh God, I got to talk to this woman. I got to get this girl on here. Okay. The mission of this episode is to help people find where shame is showing up in their relationships where they don't even know it. And instead of what I see coming into my office often is somebody going, great, now I know I have shame. And all the tools I'm trying don't work. I just feel like a crappy person, and it makes the shame worse. They had shame and they didn't know it was shame. And now that they know it's shame, they feel like they are the villain. They're the problem in the relationship. They're the problem in everything in their life, which is ironic because the point of knowing this is stop feeling that way. Mm-hmm. And I would love a little piece of why this became so passionate for you. I know you have a 14 plus year chronic shame journey, and just to let people know listening, you're not just some expert who read about this and now you're going to lecture at them. You are them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't realize for kind of the first year and a half, I would say, of learning about the nervous system, that shame was really, at the root of so much of what I was experiencing. Mm-hmm. And so having kind of the shame realization for me initially came through research. I am obsessed with research, and I started to notice that what I was feeling didn't feel transient or temporary in my body. It felt like I was unable to access a deeper layer, and there was a deep feeling of stuckness, which I now am able to kind of map to the freeze response, through the dorsal vagal branch of our parasympathetic nervous system. So there's a really cool, sciencey nervous system explanation for it. And what really highlighted this for me was, for so much of my life, there was this pattern of knowing better, but not doing better, and temporary relief versus like deep, sustainable, wow, I actually feel different.
Yes.
And this is what really highlighted shame for me, because shame is different than other emotional experiences where it hits us at that level of our identity. So when we speak of shame, it's this language of I am versus, oh, I did that, I felt that way, where guilt can be, I did something bad. Shame is, I am bad because I did something bad. And for me, a lot of this stemmed from, I was bullied really badly when I was younger, kind of essentially right as I started going through puberty as a young girl. The people I went to school with started bullying me and calling me Shrek. And it turned into pretty vicious emotional and physical bullying that mostly came from men. And I was very kind of ignored by most of the girls that I went to school with as well. So it really created this othering experience for me, which really reinforced a lot of the shame that I think we all just get conditioned to in general in society. And I actually kind of took on this unconscious identity and somatic experience of being an ogre, where like my body literally felt bigger than what it was. I felt like anytime somebody looked at me, they saw something really ugly, but I could never pinpoint what it was. And that also created shame, where it's like, oh my God, everybody always sees this deficiency in me and I can't find what it is to fix it. And so I got into this then hyper vigilant way of relating to myself of, okay, what's the next healing modality? What's the next thing? Like, what can I find that will fix this inherent deficiency?
Yes.
And so that's been so much of my journey. And what I'd love to speak about, and I'll kind of pause here in a second to hear, your reflections or your questions, is how radical self-acceptance through shadow work has been the ultimate nervous system regulator for me, and I believe is like this antidote to shame. And I'll just kind of pause there for a second and see, where you want to take it.
I have I love you. Okay, so I don't know. I'm debating on where to start. I think I'm gonna hit. Here are the main things that I want to pull out of that. One, the identity piece. Two, the hypervigilance piece. Uh, and three, the last thing you said. Will you say the last thing you said again?
The shadow work, that shadow work
Yes.
has been, yes, kind of the practice to de-shame.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God. Okay. So they kind of tie into each other in ways. I want to start with identity because I think it's the most accessible part.
Mm-hmm.
You had a post where you explained essentially your identity comes from the way people perceived you when you were younger and tends to remain that way. I mean, for most people, your identity remains how are people perceiving me,
Mm-hmm.
and to tie that in with hypervigilance, so a lot of people become hypervigilant about how is everyone perceiving me. Am I good? Am I not? Am I okay? It's a incredibly external lack of sense of self, which is another thing that you said that I loved. Low self worth is a low self esteem is low self worth is a low sense of self. That's how you said it. Um, so all of this to say, when you're starting to shift the identity part of it, so you're letting go of I am a bad thing, and embracing I did a bad thing, that doesn't make me bad.
Mm-hmm.
How?
Yeah. So this this is so interesting to me. Um, and this is true shadow work, is I love to ask this question, so what? So people will say something like, okay, like I can see that, shame made me bully my partner, right? Like when, like that can be a natural way that shame can make us show up in relationships, is we
Yeah.
try and bring people down to the level of our misery. So we'll say harsh, judgmental things to our partner
Yeah.
because that's how we are experiencing reality, is like, I'm judging myself this way, therefore I'm going to judge other people this way and communicate in this way.
Mhm.
And so most people's immediate response to this, once they become aware of it and they think that it's a healing approach, but it's actually shame trying to fix them, is like, oh, okay, so now I immediately need to change my behavior and I need to feel differently. But you don't feel differently. You might actually feel angry, resentful, hateful towards your partner.
Mhm.
So what I say is, it's actually so important, and this is where, you use the word villain, and I love this, is we
Mhm.
actually have to be able to accept exactly as we are right now. So if you
Mhm.
are literally acting like a villain, you are being nagging, rude, aggressive, and hateful towards your partner, can
Yeah.
you accept that there is a version of you that currently exists that is all of those things? And
Yes.
you accept and be more present in your body as you are acknowledging that this is
Mhm.
a version of you that exists, and that maybe actually you get some sort of satisfaction and benefit from being that way,
Mm.
because that is how the nervous system works. We want to survive, and this is where it ties into identity, is you will have learned to source a fractured version of your needs, which gives you a sense of safety, by judging other people, by getting them to fall into line through using shame, because that is what you do to yourself. And so your sense of self as you're navigating the world is, oh, I can source safety by making my partner feel 2 feet tall so he'll take out the garbage.
Yeah.
And you do that. So you actually have to be able to accept that there is a version of you that does that, and you get some satisfaction, you get some level of safety and survival from being that
Mm.
way. And this is very different than, oh, like, immediately moving into, okay, I'm going to do this different, I'm going to feel differently. When you are able to accept that every single human being is able to be hateful, resentful, shameful, and cruel,
Mhm.
What ends up happening is you're able to free yourself from the expectation that there is only one version of you that is able to have access to safety, and that you being hateful right now, hey, guess what? You're allowed to think that you're also able to have access to safety while you're being hateful. Does that mean that's how you want to be? No. But it shifts your journey from being, okay, if I only can accept the version of me that is healed versus
Mhm.
I can accept where I am right now. And then you are actually able to take a lot more accountability and feel so much safer in your body when you start from this place.
Okay. So, I'm gonna work backwards from what you said. I can only accept the version of me that is healed. What I see working with couples and with relationships in general, I work with, like, parents and children and all that, is that if I can only accept the healed version of me, I can only accept the healed version of you. And so, there are 2 types. This is a kind of a simplification, but there are 2 types of hypervigilance that I see. One is somebody who wakes up in the morning and goes, "What bad thing is going to happen to me? How do I protect myself against it?" And the other, and these two like kind of create each other while drawing towards each other. The other, that one I call hypervigilante. My husband made that up and I was like, genius. And
Love
the
that.
other one is eggshell hypervigilance, where you wake up and you go, "What thing am I going to do wrong that I'm not going to know I did wrong until later?" And so you're just constantly trying to not do wrong. Both of them are shameful. And that line that you said, "I can only accept the healed version of me," and how accepting the hateful version of yourself allows you to accept the fact that other people are also that way.
Mhm.
If you're the eggshell version of the hypervigilance, what I see happen over and over again, and this was me at the beginning of my relationship too, is that if my partner was anything less than 10 out of 10, they were 8 out of 10. And in any realm, if they're being a little mean to me, if they're being a little sad, if they're being anything other than like their peak, that's my, I don't have the right to exist as a whole human until I get you back to 10 out of 10. I disappear and I have to get you there. And I see those overlapping a lot. And the thing that helped in my relationship that healed both of us on a deep level, which is why I love that you reference the relationship part of this. Like, it's not just work with you and yourself.
Mhm.
It does require other humans and interaction and acknowledging them. Is my husband and I started saying, "That's okay," and letting the other person, which Mel Robbins just wrote a book called Let Them Theory. I love that as her tagline, "Let Them." I think it's great, which is, okay, you can be hateful right now. That's your choice. That's good. That's on you. I still love you. I don't want to
Mhm.
be around the hatefulness, so I'm going to take some time. And it made us both become so much fuller as humans, so much less eggshell walking, so much less blame. We're still working on it, but it comes back to that. If I can only accept the healed version of me, I can only accept the healed version of you. And so now you have the responsibility of being wholly healed and happy and pleasant every time you're around me, which is incredibly draining for you. And you're like, I don't, and you will probably feel guilty because why are you so irritated with this person who's being nice, technically? So that's something that I see
Mhm.
a lot. And in your own life, have you done that through therapeutic relationships or friendships? Or I know your one of your taglines is ditch therapy, so maybe not therapeutic relationships, but but through friendships or familial relationships or romantic relationships, or like, how did you start to see this reflected in other people and not just this solo isolated journey?
Yeah, when you're speaking, one of the things that I find so beautiful about what it sounds like you and your husband have been able to do is to, through shame healing, depersonalize. And that is really like at the core of what shame does is it over personalizes everything and it makes us
Yes.
overly sensitive. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of topics on that of like, anyway, I'll pause that for a second. But the over
I'll make a note.
personalization is like, you are acting hateful right now because I am me, not just because you are having an independent experience, or maybe I even did something that created a response in you. But
Yeah.
what shame does is says, because you are you at the very core and essence of your being, your presence elicited hate from this person, and they're doing it in order to harm you and make you feel rejected and like you're going to be abandoned and left behind. And so,
Mhm.
of course, we're going to have a massive response to that. And this is also where I think it's really interesting, the male versus female nervous system, and like biologically what we're wired for is women
Mm.
are on average smaller and less physically capable of protecting themselves against physical threats in their environment, and men are more capable of this. And so we hear a lot for women that they have this like tend and befriend kind of tendency, which is actually very driven from a physiological, an
Mm.
evolutionary purpose in the body, which is to overtake responsibility for the
Mm.
environment, because we also see broader contextual clues and are much more usually aware of the emotional state of another person. So your husband comes in the room, he had a hard day, he like throws his stuff on the ground. I would say an unconscious and non-embodied woman is going to be like, I need to make him feel better immediately. And it is now my
Yes.
responsibility. And if he doesn't
Yes.
feel better, I feel shame. I feel unsafe. That then turns into hypervigilance and over focusing on all of his body cues and how he's responding to you, instead of being able to say, wow, I care about this person. I really hate to see them, feel upset. And my husband is his own person. And unless he communicates to me that I did something that is making him feel this way and is able to have an open, constructive conversation, I'm going to just assume that he's having his own experience. I'm going to see how or if he wants my support. And if he doesn't, I'm able to deal with my own emotional experience of this and not over personalize and make it about me. And vice
Mhm.
versa. Like men will do this in different ways. And so this is where I really saw it start to play out in my own life, with my dad, even with male friendships and female friendships, of if I'm around somebody and I can tell that they're agitated or not feeling their best, I noticed that I would completely over personalize, and I would actually center myself in their experience and take the
Yes.
responsibility of
Yes.
changing their state for them. And often I was unsuccessful in this because I'm not them. And anything
Yeah.
I did was temporary, or it was supportive, but didn't fundamentally shift what they were experiencing, which I
Mhm.
then took as reinforcement that I'm not good enough. I'm shitty. I am unsafe. Going
Mhm.
back to like nervous system language, I am unsafe around this person because I am not able to get them into a state that makes me feel safe to be around them.
Mhm.
And therefore, I feel awful, frozen,
Mm.
shut down, and I now need to isolate myself. So there's two practices to this. Number one is developing and creating nervous system capacity for safe, conscious communication and relationships, where you are able to support the people in your life when they're upset and actually make it about them, while also holding a standard for yourself of how you want to be communicated with. If somebody is upset, that can
Mhm.
explain why they might have an agitated tone of voice. It, however, does not excuse or give them any type of reason to communicate to you
Mhm.
harshly or be rude, mean, cruel, or spiteful, or anything like that.
Mhm.
So that is like a real skill and nervous system capacity that is relational. And then
Yeah.
there's within yourself of being so honest about, usually what ends up happening is we have the like cortisol adrenaline surge as soon as that person comes in and you feel their state.
Yeah.
Then you feel the what do I do? Okay, and you have to be really good at noticing how your body somatically experiences that, and then being able to resource for yourself. So like,
Mhm.
wow, being around this person right now is like really debilitating for me. Like maybe I need to greet my husband, greet my friend, be like, oh, I just need to go to the washroom. Go to the washroom for a second, splash some water on your face, do a little bit of orienting and resourcing, speak to yourself and allow yourself to have the reaction that you did, while also holding yourself accountable for saying, okay, how do I want to engage in this without over personalizing what is happening right now?
Yeah. Okay, you might have noticed I took notes while you were talking because I was like, "We have to do." Um, I loved your line, "I'm not safe because I'm unable to get them into a state that makes me feel safe around them."
Yeah.
So you're centering yourself in their story, like their body, their feelings are yours. The the story that you told at the beginning, and then you referenced this at the end of he walks in, he's in a bad mood, he's huffing and puffing. And then I'm taking responsibility. But also, what you referenced at the end is, and he might be blaming and criticizing and saying mean things because he's in a bad mood. I have a catch, almost catchphrase, which is essentially if blame is present, boundaries need to be too.
Mm,
So if the conversation, like my number one rule working with relationships and in my own relationship is as soon as blame is present, the truth is not. We've decided we're not on the same team. We're not able to progress anywhere. So to know when my red flag for myself to know this happened this morning with our dog who pooped in our house and we were both not happy about it. As soon as the conversation switches to blame or the energy is blame, it's this conversation is valuable, but not if we're blaming each other. So let's take time and come back when we're ready to be on the same team again. And
yeah.
that has been helpful for us.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that you said that I wanted to call out too. So in Gestalt therapy, which is a really somatically based form of mostly talk therapy, there's this beautiful line that changed my life. Every feeling is co-created.
Mm,
And what shame does is says, this is entirely on me and my responsibility and my control. And I should be able to, I'm not safe because I'm unable to get him into a state that makes me feel safe around him. That is now the feeling is mine. It's mine to create. It's my fault. It's my responsibility. But a feeling is co-created is going, wait, it's not my fault that he's treating me this way. It's also a two-way street. If I start walking on eggshells and accepting his blame and accepting his negative words as if they are true, now I am reinforcing what he's doing. A feeling is not created just by him or just by me. So the way that people make us feel is probably how they make most people feel. And also our response to it is altering the feeling itself a little. I don't know if that sounds like convoluted. I probably need a story to explain it better, but
I really love that. I think that what you're talking about, I mean, from a nervous system perspective, is how we can co-regulate or co-dysregulate with people. And
yes.
yeah, and what I also think this speaks to, so shame is really great at creating extremes. And this is why shame is so present typically in people that live in functional freeze, where you're like either on, activated, or off and shut down. And when we are operating in extremes, and when we have not been taught or built nervous system capacity to have healthy interdependent relationships,
Mm.
which happens when we're a kid and our primary caregiver is unable to take accountability for how they treat us. And so
Mm.
as a child, the only option we have is to say, oh, it's completely our fault, which we do completely unconsciously in order to sustain access to what is going to keep us alive, our parent.
Mm.
This pattern continues in adulthood. And so we actually learn to escalate self blame and overtake responsibility in order to source safety. And this is where, people talk about
That's good.
reparenting and inner child work is actually so much of what we are learning on the healing journey as adults is that we can be left, but we can't be abandoned. So there's a difference between as a child, you are unable to make money to a degree for yourself in order to have access to food, shelter, hopefully some type of emotional support or guidance. But as an adult, you probably have a job, you're able to support yourself, or you have skills to be able to move into that. So somebody can leave you, but they cannot abandon you and completely remove access to your ability to survive. However, we feel that that is the possibility of what will happen if we
Yeah.
actually express that we have needs. And so shame creates that extreme of either it's all their fault or
Mhm.
it's all my fault.
Mhm.
What we're getting at is we're completely relational beings, women even more so than men. And so
Yes.
we need to have, if we want to have the kind of life where we are truly safe and regulated, we also need to be around people that are willing to take responsibility for how they impact us. And we
Mm.
need to be radically honest about what are we co-creating here together? Like, are we creating this normal baseline that when you're upset, I get upset and then we get upset at each other? Or are we creating a baseline where when you're upset, we actually have, we've talked through how I support you. And if you're unable to receive support, that it's okay that I distance myself from you for a few hours while you go
Mhm.
through your process of navigating that. And
Mhm.
it does take psychological maturity, which I think in this day and age can sometimes be hard to come by. But I'm
Mm.
such an advocate for that. And this is also where one of the most important aspects of healing from shame is
Yeah.
embracing nuance, because it moves us away from the
Yes.
extreme all or nothing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. To that end, kind of attached to this, when you say extreme, this is also true when I work with clients who are in a positive mindset. I'm
Mm,
putting quotes here because it's only positive. So their response, something bad happens, and their response is, and this good thing happened.
mm,
And something tense is happening. And they're like, but this is good. Or there's something in the past that needs to be addressed. And they go, but I don't want to talk about the past. Let's be in the present. It's back to the extremes. It's not like ignore the present or ignore the positive, but that's not what I'm advocating for. But back to your nuance thing, one of the extremes that seems to happen is, okay, now I'm going to completely deny the presence of the negative and hope that it goes away.
mm.
And as you're explaining this, I hadn't previously attached it to a shame response. And now I'm in real time processing with you. Is that part of the shame? Does that also come from having that internalized shame framework? What do you think?
Absolutely. And so this is where, again, shame is so interesting. It's like a binding experience. So like you can have somebody that can feel anger but doesn't feel shame about their anger. But then you can have someone who's feeling anger and then is feeling shame about their anger. So the
Yes.
person that has shame about their anger is not going to be able to express their anger. And so this is where I also think that shadow work is so important, because shadow work looks at the shadows or the suppressed parts of us, and shame is the tool of suppression. So in especially I would say, like, as the whole mindset and self-growth thing became so popular over the last, 10, 15 years, toxic positivity kind of, came into play. And fundamentally, what this all comes back to is the human experience is absolutely psychotic and we can't make any. So
Yeah.
most people unwittingly and unconsciously engage in escapism in so many different forms. And toxic positivity is a form of escapism and denying the reality, which is we have this entire spectrum of the human experience, all the way from shame, grief, and rage to joy and ecstasy. The people that are regulated build capacity to feel all of it, versus what we've been taught is the people that are regulated and healthy just feel the positive emotions.
Yeah.
What this does is it creates shame about feeling and expressing shame, grief, resentment, hate, jealousy, which are all normal parts of the human experience.
Mhm.
And when we are able to express and share those in safe vulnerability,
Yeah.
create more connection, more wholeness, and actually allow us to act from a much more emotionally intelligent and loving place. So this is so much of what my work stands
Mm.
for: is stop trying to escape the breadth and spectrum of the human experience and instead build nervous system capacity to feel everything.
Mm.
And when you are
Mm.
able to experience and express anger in a
Wait.
healthy, constructive way, you're being a real human, in my opinion. Like, we need to be able to feel angry. Anger is an important cue that a boundary has been crossed. Grief happens when there's an extreme loss. Like, of course you're going to have a response to that, but we need to remember collectively that these are not parts that should be suppressed. We actually need to get better at expressing them. And that is when we experience wholeness and aliveness, and you feel a deep spiritual connection. And this provides a certain version of pleasure that
Mm.
is different than orgasmic pleasure or the pleasure of eating chocolate. There's a type of pleasure that comes from finally
Yes.
expressing, touching, and meeting your grief, your anger, your rage,
Yes.
your jealousy, and owning it. Like, yes, this is in me and I need to figure out how to feel it.
Yeah, and one step further than that is doing that within relationship.
Yeah.
mean, that's my ultimate mountain type top peak goal to get my clients to when they are coming to me, because my definition of a relationship is a successful relationship is that it's healing,
Mm-hmm.
not fully healthy, not happy, not even long lasting, healing. And to get to that place, you're like, oh, like it, maybe the better word for it is regulating, like deeply regulating. So, what you're describing is essentially toxic positivity is suppression versus regulation.
Yeah.
And Dr. Becky Kennedy, the Good Inside,
Mm-hmm.
do you follow this? She wrote the book Good Inside. She does parenting. She's a parenting and primarily therapist for minors. Um, she has this beautiful line: "You cannot regulate an emotion that you do not allow yourself to have."
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's the that was listening to you, I was like, that's basically it. We think that regulated people are these people who are happy all the time, but that's not true. You don't even get to the appearance getting to that appearance in a stable way by somebody who's with you all the time, where it seems like you're happy a lot of the time, only happens when your emotions are allowed to live for the amount of time they're supposed to. Like anger is supposed to be expressed and then it kind of disappears. Like I used to remember the things I was angry about so well, and now my husband points it out all the time. I don't remember things I was angry about because I've gotten to this place through being in a relationship with him and through doing self-work, but having him witnessing it and like being there with me, where now I get angry, the anger is fine, and then it's moving on. And
Yeah.
when you're explaining, how did you say it? You said feeling shame about feeling angry. There it's the simplest way to say that is just feeling bad about feeling bad.
Yes.
Just like every version of bad that you can feel. I felt so bad about it. Like I'm putting this negative emotion on somebody else. So I need to go hide, journal, process. And then it's once I've taken care of my bad emotion, then I am allowed to connect with people. And that's why I'm a relationship coach. That's why I'm so passionate about relationships, is that doing this work on my own didn't work.
Yeah.
But doing it and going, okay, I need to be what I think is unlovable in front of you. And what I need from you is to just still love me. I don't need you to fix this. I don't need you to say, I don't need you to do anything besides say, I still love you. And I did that with some close people in my life. And that healed so many things that I thought were chronic problems, like extreme mood swings, panic attacks, self harm, like all this stuff that I was like, well, I guess this is just how I am, healed through what you're explaining right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just so powerful. We've gone over time, but I have one. So I'm debating on if I should ask this question or not. Um, yeah. Okay. Inspired by the last thing I was saying about the symptoms, what physical and emotional symptoms do you know of that shame often causes that people think are just permanent? That's just part of their life. They're just that kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
But you've experienced that's not true, that it's actually healing
Yeah.
shame heals these things.
So to break this down in kind of a few ways. So number one is that shame is a freezing emotion in your nervous system or a freezing somatic experience. And it kind of like activates or engages the dorsal vagal branch of your parasympathetic nervous system, which goes into your digestive function, kind of like your pelvic diaphragm and your pelvic bowl. So if you can imagine, if you're eating food and your digestive system is frozen, what's going to kind of start to happen? digestive issues, IBS, an inability for that part of your body to actually like activate properly and have the correct signals to feel safe to digest.
Mm.
So for me, I had and I mean, I think this can be like a, multi-year process, is I had a lot of digestive issues, and I learned to use like black coffee on an empty stomach to get my digestion going in the morning, because my digestion was literally frozen on its
Mhm.
own. And that happened because of chronic shame.
Mhm.
So that's one. Then you have, bad, poor digestion. You have inflammation in your gut. You might start to have skin rashes. Like I had chronic cystic acne for a really long time. You have brain fog, and all of this is, your gut health is so extremely related to your nervous system and your overall like bodily function. So you can have like a lot of different skin issues or brain fog, for, I'd say, primarily women, but like pain during sex. You don't actually get horny because that entire pelvic region of your body is quite literally frozen.
Frozen.
You can also have like the physical posture that shame turns us into is like the hunchback crab kind of thing, because shame is so freezing. And think about like from this primal nervous system somatic animal perspective is tucking your tail. Like when you're shamed, your head droops, you feel like, oh, okay, like I'm not good enough. And so you go into this like tight little ball of like, I almost trying to go into the fetal position to protect yourself, and you're ashamed, you're tucking your tail. So these are all different psychosomatic symptoms that come through.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, I could go off on like how this manifests in your day to day life, but this is also like for men and women, but specifically for women, you have to center your pelvic diaphragm in nervous system regulation and learn how to orient your pelvic diaphragm in space in order to be regulated, because that's how the signals are actually traveling from your brain down through your entire nervous system in a healthy, active, and regulated way.
Center your pelvic diaphragm in space. I don't know what that means.
To give you an example, so um, for a lot of women that have like pain around their period, which is something that I had, and I had specifically lower back pain, this is often a sign of a retroverted uterus. So your uterus is like pressing against the back of your body. So you can imagine your uterus, which is an organ, like floats in space, kind of in this, abdominal pelvic cavity. As we tuck our tail and we start to compress, this all like your uterus gets pushed into the back of your body, pressing on nerves and causing pain.
Oh.
So what starts to happen is as compression starts to happen, there's a lack of flow and communication, and there's a lot of stagnation and freeze, which can all be caused and reinforced by shame. And so what happens is our tail starts to tuck, and as we're sitting, we're literally sitting on our spine. We're not actually sitting on our sit bones. So everything starts to like tuck under. So when I say orient your pelvis in space, what we actually want is as we're sitting to be sitting on our sit bones and not sitting on our spine, which creates space and flow and openness for your uterus and
Oh.
organ to actually sit properly in space. Um,
Oh, give space to your uterus, basically.
yeah, yeah.
Give your uterus some room to breathe.
Yeah, like she needs to like move around. Like the female pelvis is meant to be both stable and fluid, which is different from the male pelvis because, if we get pregnant and we give birth, like all those things need to happen.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like when I started working on my posture, I stopped getting cramping, and so it's like my uterus
Wow.
moved. But this came from also, de-shaming, being present in my pelvic region as a woman, and like getting comfortable talking about like menstrual blood and where I am in my cycle, and
Yeah.
the like natural sensuality that comes with being a woman, and like feeling heavy in your hips and your womb, and like these kinds of things,
Mhm.
which all create better communication pathway of your nervous system throughout your entire body. And because your nervous system is like the conductor of your physiology, you
Yeah.
now have better, more frequent, higher quality communication throughout your body, which contributes to hormonal regulation, emotional regulation,
Yeah.
feeling safer in your body, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Wow, that makes sense. I love that. You were talking about how shame freezes us in sex, and you were saying pain in sex. Obviously, I talk about sex a lot because I'm a relationship coach and primarily work with couples. So this is such a great lens to view your partner as not rejecting you.
Mhm.
through. Sometimes the shame is because you and your partner are each other's exacerbators of the shame. Like your partner has now filled the role of validating the fact that you feel ashamed about yourself, or and you have probably filled that role for them. I mean, one of the most common dynamics in couples is great. You either tell me I should be ashamed or I shouldn't. And
Yep.
without awareness, they're probably just going to make you feel ashamed. I mean, what happens often is one partner becomes a, essentially a bully and the other one becomes the bullied
Yep.
victim person. And both of those people don't like their roles. So they both feel shamed and then they can't have pleasurable sex. And I'll find that it's performative
Yep.
from the victim side to appease the other person, but not actually pleasurable. Or it's like, I don't know how to communicate. I don't know how to feel better. So this is the thing I use that seems to work.
Yep.
Again, not connection, not pleasure. So it's an interesting tie. It's just an interesting tie-in to be like, oh yeah, because you can't. If your partner is not turned on often, a great question is to be like, oh, where are you at with shame right now? Like, how are you feeling about yourself in the
Yep.
world? How are you feeling about yourself when you're around me?
Mhm.
And instead of taking it as a rejection, taking it as a representation of where they're at in relationship to themselves, the world, and you, their partner.
Yep. I feel for me, like I'm not currently in a romantic relationship. And the last few, even like dating experiences that I've had have been radically different in an amazing
Mm.
way because
Mm.
I've been able to de-shame and depersonalize experiences. I've also really been able to acknowledge as a woman, the men are very different. Like their brain structure is different. They do things for different reasons. And communicating to men in a way that actually like speaks their language
Mm.
has like radically shifted like even how I view men and how my body feels around them. And I'm no longer only perceiving myself through the male gaze in a really dysregulating way. And I feel much more able to intrinsically honor men as like naturally being providers and protectors. And I experience that so much more in my day-to-day life now, even though I'm, 2024, like an independent,
Yeah.
I have my own business, like this kind of thing. But like I used to never even be able to accept like a guy carry my suitcase without like apologizing. And now I'm just like, every time I let a man naturally engage and like supporting me as a woman, and I really appreciate and honor him for what he's able to provide, it just
Yeah.
like lights them up. And there's like this beautiful light feeling. And I'm like, this is like what I really believe is possible for men and women, and, women and women, or like whatever relationship dynamic that you're in. My lived experience is, between a man and a woman. And I'm like, this is fucking amazing. Like, oh my God. And like, without going into like crazy details, but even like the last, like sexual experiences that I had, like I had G-spot orgasms consistently for the first time ever in my life. Like I didn't even know my body could do that. And I was just like, okay, that's not frozen there anymore. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And so now it's like having all these experiences and then collecting, like, yeah, I want to have incredible sex with my partner, which requires both of us acknowledging that like men and women have different nervous systems and different needs, and being willing to like speak each other's language and depersonalize and recognize like it's hard and so on and so forth. And it's just as like, I just think humans are meant to live like that, and we're not meant to be so like, this against this, or like gender war, or like blah, like this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, and I mean, there's so many reasons for all of that, but at this point, I'm just like, I don't really care what the reasons are anymore. I just know what I want for myself, and like,
Yeah.
I want these beautiful relationships, and my female relationships, my male relationships, and so I'm just like learning how to do that.
I mean, it comes back to your line earlier, like the very beginning, you said radical acceptance of all of yourself. It's a similar thing. It's a radical acceptance of all of that person. And so you kind of have a jumping off space that you're explaining from what you understand about masculine and feminine, or men and women,
Mhm.
and going, okay, so going from there, who are you? And how do I find out who you are and be curious and accept who you are? It opens the way that you're using it here. It sounds like curiosity. Like some people use masculine and feminine framework in order to have these boxes that they can understand and control the world through. And it's very restrictive to the
Hmm.
opposite sex and their own sex. Like, well, we do this and they do that. And the way you're explaining it is okay, we tend to think differently. We tend to feel differently. This is tends to light them up. This tends to be like I'm seeing this pattern and I'm not you're it doesn't sound like this box you're putting around an entire gender so much as it does a lens you're offering to look through that allows you to understand more and be more curious, which is just a really cool way to hear it because a lot of times that I hear that language, especially working with such a variety of couples. I work with poly couples and gay couples and queer and just like all over on the LGBTQ spectrum too. So it's to watch so listening to women language is always trippy because I'm working with so many different kinds of couples. And I just love the way that you framed it as this way to get curious about something you couldn't otherwise know without somebody being like, hey, there are differences in what lights us up. I love that line really got me, the what lights us up. I was like, yeah, that's a really good way to frame it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for me this is like where I growing up, I was like so disconnected from my body. I didn't know what it was like to feel feminine in a physical way. Like I was like so disconnected from the fact that I like had a uterus, had a vagina,
Yeah.
and I was just like intellectually I knew it was there, but like a lot of girls I was like my period's so inconvenient. I'm just going to like shove a tampon up there and like I can have casual sex and like all this stuff that like now for me what feels so true is like sex is really sacred. I deeply believe in monogamy for myself. Like that's what my body
Yeah.
has told me feels safest now that I'm like present in my body. I'm like, I don't want just anybody like up in there. I want someone
Yeah.
that I feel safe and can like open with. I don't use tampons unless it's like an absolute, like emergency. And I'm all about like, bringing flow into my body. And I now feel like my femininity is deeply rooted in my physiology, and this is where
Ooh.
like masculine and feminine dynamics like exist within all people, like no matter your sexual orientation or whatever. Like I think that at the end of the day, the way that men, male and female or men and women do things, like a man and a woman can have the same job in a company and they will likely do it very differently. Does that mean that that one should have the job over the other? No. Yes, like like you have these energetics within you no matter your orientation, but like what I like to think about is there are men that teach on nervous system regulation, and they do that through often, whether consciously or unconsciously, the lens of being in a male body with male physiology. So we could be teaching the
Mm.
exact same topic, but I
Yeah.
have a lens through female physiology and my lived experience as a woman that
Mhm.
naturally is going to tailor what I teach. And I think that's so beautiful. And it's about recognizing that like two people can have the exact same job. And it doesn't mean a man or a woman should have that over the other, just that they're going to likely do it in different ways. And like the female brain is different than the male brain. And we have different ways that we process environmental cues and different types of awareness. And we can cultivate, as women, we tend to have broader contextual relational awareness. So we're much more aware of the emotional states of people around us.
Mhm.
Does that mean men are completely unaware? No, that's something, however, they often need to work harder to cultivate. Whereas for women, we can get so caught up in everyone around us that we don't
Yeah.
have the single focus that men much more easily can tap into. And so we need to cultivate that. And this is where we can be mentors for each other in life without
Yeah.
saying, oh, I should shame that I have contextual awareness and become like a man. Or a man
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm going to shame I have single awareness and become like a woman. It's like recognizing that the more we honor those innate differences, the better our experience as humans become.
Ooh. The mentor thing is such a cool take because another thing that happens is like, oh, well, I'm not a man, so I can't do that. Or I shouldn't. It's forcing myself to be something I'm not. Or I'm not a woman, so I can't do that. It's forcing myself to be something I'm not. And your line there of we can be mentors for each other. That's exactly what a healing, alive, full relationship looks like is is somebody going, "Man, you're really good at emotional awareness. I love that. I want to be better like that. You're really good at showing up and protecting. I'd love that. I want to be a little more like that." It's not like I want to be you. It's I admire this in you, and there's no reason not to also strengthen that muscle. It's like from an analogy of your body, it's like going, "Well, I'm naturally really strong in my biceps, so I will never work out my legs."
Yes, exactly.
Why? Why
Yeah.
wouldn't you want your whole body to be as strong as it is capable of being strong? That's really cool. Oh my God. I this was better. I had a genuinely too high of expectations for this podcast, and it has exceeded all of them. I love talking to you so much. I love how your brain works, how you structure these things. There are so many points that I was like, I want to pause and repeat that 3 times and then keep going. So thank you so much for coming on and doing this.
Oh my God, my pleasure.
Dana, where do people find you? What do you specialize in? How do they work with you?
Mm-hmm.
This is your time.
Instagram would definitely be the best. We also don't know if TikTok is actually getting banned or not. So definitely Instagram at Dana Dawsey. And I'm actually in a really cool transition where I'm moving towards focusing on nervous system regulation for women and for female physiology and really getting into kind of centering the pelvic diaphragm in nervous system regulation, which is a different type of somatic work compared to male physiology. I am going to be running my first kind of de-shaming shadow work program specifically for women in February 2025 that is going to kind of bridge the gap between embodying your cycle, understanding how your nervous system shifts in each part of your cycle through the lens of shadow work and de-shaming. And my goal is to really help women kind of take on this identity of being a resourced woman, both internally and externally in their life. And I believe shame is one of the biggest blockers to being and embodying this identity of a resourced woman. So if that's kind of the journey or the path that you're on, I would love to connect with you, potentially have you in the program. And I'm sure it's just going to be the first of many.
That's beautiful. Resourced women. Ooh,
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you again for coming on. I'm sure we will continue talking. And thank you to anybody who's listening or watching for joining us on this conversation. It was such a gift.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I've really enjoyed this.
We did it. That
Woo!
was so awesome.
I love that. Thank you.
Oh,